December 20th, 1941. 25,000 feet above the South China Sea. The air was thin and cold enough to freeze exposed skin. The engines of the Boeing B-17C, Flying Fortress, roared against the vast emptiness, each propeller blade slicing through the morning air like a saw. Inside the bomber's cramped fuselage, frost clung to the metal walls, and the gunner's breath formed small clouds in front of their oxygen masks. Captain Colin Kelly gripped the control yoke, squinting through the frosted cockpit glass. Below him stretched an endless expanse of ocean, the faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off the waves. He and his crew had taken off from Clark Field in the Philippines hours earlier, part of the U.S. Army Air Force's desperate attempt to strike back after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Their target, Japanese shipping near Formosa. In the distance, 6 dark specks appeared, fast, agile, and closing rapidly. Zeros, the co-pilot muttered. We've got company. Kelly didn't flinch. All stations, ready positions. Keep your eyes open. The B-17 wasn't designed for dogfighting, but it was no ordinary bomber. Its body was encased in thick armor plating, its frame strengthened by layers of riveted aluminum. It bristled with machine guns, from the nose, the tail, and both sides. A fortress in the sky, built to defend itself when no fighter escort could reach that far. But the Japanese pilots didn't see it that way. To them, the B-17 was slow, heavy, and clumsy, a lumbering target begging to be torn apart. Lieutenant Saburo Shindo, leading the formation of a 6M0s, smiled behind his goggles. These Americans bring their flying buses into combat, he sneered into the radio. Let's show them how real planes fight. The Zeros swooped down from above, sunlight flashing off their silver wings. Their 20mm cannons opened fire, spitting glowing tracers into the sky. The first burst slammed into the B-17's fuselage, tearing holes through its outer skin. Sparks flew. One engine began to cough black smoke. Inside, chaos erupted. "Number 3's hit," the flight engineer shouted. "Keep it steady," Kelly barked. "Return fire." From the dorsal turret, Sergeant Meyer swung his twin .50 caliber Brownings toward the attacking fighters. The guns thundered, vibrating the entire airframe. The tail gunner joined in, spraying lead across the sky in brilliant streaks. The Zeros darted in and out, nimble and merciless. Yet each time they approached, the fortress answered with a wall of gunfire. One Zero came too close. Its canopy caught a burst of tracers, and in an instant it exploded into a ball of fire, spiraling down toward the sea. Shindo cursed. He made another pass, this time diving head-on. "They can't survive this," he growled, firing directly at the cockpit. The B-17 shuddered under the impact, glass shattering, alarms screaming. But it didn't go down. Instead, it kept flying. Kelly's face was slick with sweat despite the cold. His hands trembled as he fought the controls. "We're not done yet," he said through gritted teeth. "Hold this bird together." For nearly 20 minutes, the duel raged in the sky. The fortress was hit again and again. Engine fires, shredded wings, holes the size of fists, but it refused to fall. The Japanese pilots were stunned. They had expected an easy kill, yet the bomber soaked up their attacks like a beast made of iron and willpower. Finally, low on fuel and ammunition, the Zeros broke off and turned back toward Formosa. The battered B-17 limped toward the Philippine coast, trailing smoke, one engine dead. Inside the bomber, the men were silent, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. As they approached land, the navigator whispered, "They called it a flying fortress, huh? Now I see why." Below, the South China Sea shimmered under the sunlight, peaceful, indifferent to the war raging above. And somewhere in the distance, Lieutenant Shindo stared out from his cockpit, bewildered. He had thrown everything he had at that American bomber, yet it had refused to die. The myth of the flying fortress had just been born. January 1942. Clark Field, Luzon, the Philippines. The hangar smelled of oil, sweat, and scorched metal. Mechanics swarmed around the battered B-17, its once smooth aluminum skin now riddled with holes. Entire sections of the fuselage had been stitched apart by cannon fire. Yet despite the damage, the aircraft still stood. Colonel Eugene Eubank, commander of the 19th Bomb Group, walked slowly along its flank, running his hand over a jagged tear in the metal. "They hit it with everything they had," he murmured. "And it still brought the boys home." The crew of Captain Colin Kelly's mission, what was left of them, stood nearby silent. Kelly himself hadn't made it back. He'd stayed at the controls while his crew bailed out over Luzon, keeping the dying aircraft steady until it exploded. But his sacrifice and the plane's resilience would echo across the Pacific. The press would call it the Flying Fortress, a term first coined months earlier by a Seattle journalist who'd seen the prototype roll out of Boeing's factory. Now, that name wasn't marketing, it was legend. Across the Pacific, word of the bomber's survival spread quickly, even among Japanese pilots. In briefings, commanders warned their men not to underestimate the American machine. "It is strong but slow," they said. "Strike fast and from above." Yet whispers circulated in ready rooms and mess halls. Stories of fortresses that kept flying with entire wings shredded, of bombers that limped hundreds of miles on two engines and still found their way home. By the spring of 1942, those stories had become nightmares. April 1942. Over the Coral Sea, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka led a patrol of Mitsubishi Zeros at 20,000 feet. The Pacific sky was a perfect blue dome, unmarred by clouds. Then, like a ghost on the horizon, he spotted them. For B-17Es flying in tight formation. Targets sighted. For fortresses. Altitude 20,000. Tanaka reported. "Engage," came the reply. The Zeros dove in pairs, slicing through the sky. But the Americans were ready. The moment the fighters entered range, the air filled with the furious staccato of .50 caliber guns. The bombers' tracers weaved glowing nets in every direction. Tanaka's wingman, Ensign Iwata, veered left to flank the lead fortress. "I have him," he shouted, just before a burst of gunfire ripped through his cockpit. His plane disintegrated in a flash of flame. Tanaka's scoot twisted. He banked hard, pulling up to avoid a hail of bullets. "Impossible," he whispered. "How can something that big move like that?" Inside the lead B-17, the crew worked like a single machine. Tail clear. Right waist gun hot. Number 2 engine losing oil pressure. "Keep it together, we're not done yet." Shell casings clattered to the floor as the gunners kept firing. Each man knew his role, each turret covering the others. The bomber wasn't just a target. It was a flying hive of disciplined fury. When the Zeros finally broke off, 2 of them were burning, and the B-17s continued onward, battered but alive. Tanaka returned to base shaken, his hands trembling as he removed his gloves. His squadron commander approached, expression grim. "You engaged the flying fortresses?" Tanaka nodded. "Then you know," the commander said quietly. "They're not machines. They're monsters." Back in the U.S., propaganda posters spread the myth further. Images of the B-17 soaring through flak-filled skies were plastered across cities. The flying fortress. She always comes home. It was a symbol of endurance, of American engineering, grit, and defiance. But behind that symbol was truth. The B-17 wasn't invincible, but it was unyielding. Crews called it their guardian angel, capable of taking hits that would shred any other aircraft. For the men flying them, it meant one thing. When they crossed into enemy skies, they weren't just dropping bombs. They were daring death itself and winning. August 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above Regensburg, Germany. The sun glared off the silver wings of hundreds of B-17s spread across the morning sky. A vast armada of metal and courage. The drone of thousands of engines merged into a single, thunderous hum that vibrated through the heavens. The mission: cripple the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg. The formation stretched for miles. Wave after wave of flying fortresses in tight combat boxes. Every gunner alert. Every turret glinting in the light. Inside the lead bomber, Hell's Angels, Captain Robert Morgan adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon. Navigator, check heading. On course, Captain. 2 minutes to initial point. Below, Germany passed by in neat squares of farmland and industry. Ahead, the sky began to darken. Not with clouds, but with smoke trails. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. The warning crackled through every headset. Out of the sun came the hunters. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s diving headlong into the bomber stream. They came in pairs, closing to within 100 yards before spitting 20mm cannon fire. Explosions peppered the formation. Wings tore away. A fortress burst into flames and began its slow, spiraling descent. "Keep it tight," Morgan yelled. "Don't break formation." Each bomber relied on the others for survival. The interlocking arcs of their .50 caliber guns created a deadly sphere of protection. Waist gunners and tail gunners fired until their arms went numb, the barrels glowing red-hot. Sergeant Lewis in the ball turret swung his guns skyward, locking onto a diving 190. "Got one!" he shouted as the fighter erupted in smoke and flame. The Germans expected easy prey. Instead, they met a wall of coordinated, disciplined fire. Dozens of fighters were shredded before they could even reach their targets. Still, the assault didn't stop. Shells slammed into Hell's Angels. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit. One engine burst into flame. The bombardier, Lieutenant Evans, leaned forward, adjusting his Norden bomb sight as if nothing else existed. Steady, steady. The bomb bay doors opened. Wind howled through the fuselage. Bombs away. The fortress lurched upward as its deadly cargo fell. A heartbeat later, the factory complex below erupted into fireballs, shockwaves rippling through the air. "Regensburg's burning," Evans said, his voice calm but trembling. Then came the flak. Black puffs filled the sky, anti-aircraft bursts that shredded metal and men alike. The concussions rocked the planes like toys. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage. A gunner screamed. Another plane nearby exploded into a fireball. Morgan gritted his teeth, fighting the controls. "We're hit bad, but we're going home." One engine was gone, another coughing smoke. Yet the B-17 refused to quit. The crew patched leaks with rags, manned guns with bleeding hands, and prayed as the sky around them turned into hell. By the time the survivors reached the English coast, more than 60 fortresses had been lost. But the mission succeeded. The Regensburg factory lay in ruins. Back on the ground, mechanics counted bullet holes like battle scars. Some planes returned with over 500 punctures. One had lost half its tail. Another landed with an entire engine missing. But they made it back. To the men who flew them, the B-17 wasn't just metal and bolts, it was alive. It had carried them through the worst the Luftwaffe could offer and delivered them home again. Word spread among Allied and Axis forces alike. The Flying Fortress was an enemy that wouldn't die. In the Japanese air academies, where young pilots once laughed at its size, instructors now spoke of it with respect and quiet dread. They had seen it over the Pacific. Now it was burning its legend into the skies over Europe. February 1945. Over Tokyo Bay, Japan. Night cloaked the Pacific sky, pierced only by the rhythmic flashes of anti-aircraft fire. The faint glow of distant fires reflected off the clouds, painting them red and orange like bruised steel. At 30,000 feet, a formation of B-17GS lumbered through the darkness, scarred, weathered, but relentless. In the lead plane, Major Harold "Red" Thompson adjusted his goggles and peered through the front glass, squinting at the chaotic ballet of tracer fire below. "Tokyo ahead," his navigator murmured. ETA 3 minutes. The war had changed. The Japanese Empire, once defiant, now bled under the constant rain of Allied bombs. But the Flying Fortress was still here, older now, replaced in many missions by the newer B-29 Superfortress, but not forgotten. For years it had carried America's war across 2 oceans, its silhouette becoming as iconic as the men who flew it. Thompson knew the legend well. He'd grown up hearing stories of Colin Kelly's final stand in the Philippines, of Regensburg, of Schweinfurt, of fortresses that flew home on half a wing. Tonight, as his own engines groaned in the freezing air, he understood what those stories meant. The intercom crackled. "Flak thick ahead, Major. You want to break formation?" Thompson's voice was steady. "Negative. We fly through it, just like they did." The bombardier hunched over the Norden sight, eyes narrowed. The plane shuddered as bursts exploded nearby, fragments rattling against the fuselage like hail. Open bomb bay doors. A metallic whine filled the cabin as the doors slid open beneath them. Freezing air surged in. Every man tensed. The glow of the target flickered below, Tokyo's industrial district, blazing under the reflection of searchlights. Steady, bombs away. A moment of silence. Then thunder. The city below erupted into chaos as hundreds of bombs struck their marks. Flames coiled upward, merging into columns of fire that reached toward the heavens. The B-17 climbed away, engines straining, the crew watching in grim awe. Behind them, anti-aircraft guns spat vengeance into the night. One burst tore through the right wing. Warning lights flared. Engine 3's hit. "Feather the prop," Thompson barked. "Hold her steady." The fortress shook violently but stayed airborne. Flames licked along the wing route, then died out, suffocated by the cold. The bomber climbed, limping toward the open Pacific. In the gunner's turret, Sergeant Davis exhaled, staring at the smoldering skyline fading into the distance. "She took another beating, Major," he said softly. "And she's still flying." Thompson allowed himself a rare smile. "Yeah, she always does." When the war finally ended, the Flying Fortress had written its name into history. From Pearl Harbor to Berlin, from Midway to Tokyo, it had become more than a machine. It was a symbol of endurance, a testament to the men who refused to surrender even when the sky itself tried to kill them. In Japan, captured pilots would later speak with reluctant admiration. They remembered the early days of mocking the lumbering American giants, only to watch in disbelief as those same aircraft crawled back through clouds of smoke and gunfire, their crews waving from shattered windows. In museums and memorials across the world, the B-17 stands today with scars intact, bullet holes, torn panels, fragments of flak embedded deep in its frame. They're not repaired for aesthetics. They're preserved as truth, because those holes tell the story of why the Flying Fortress earned its name. It was never about perfection. It was about persistence. As the last surviving fortresses flew home at war's end, ground crews would line the runways, saluting as the battered aircraft touched down one final time. Engines sputtering, paint scorched, wings patched with sheet metal, each one a monument to survival. And for every pilot who once called it slow, bulky, or easy prey, there was the memory of watching one burn, break apart, and somehow impossibly keep flying. That's when they stopped laughing and started calling it what it truly was, a flying fortress.